Hi everyone. Alright, so this week we're going to be talking about devices and printers. In this video specifically, we're going to be going over the device manager and how you can use that to manage your devices. Then we're going to talk a little bit about the device stage and what that is, and then we're going to talk a bit about some of the more complex topics in printers. Specifically, we're going to be talking about printer pools and printer priority. So let's talk about device manager. So first off, let's look at how we can get there. Easiest way is to click start, and like many of the other things I've showed you, just type device manager right into the search bar, and then you can see it's the first thing that pops up. Another way to get there is to right click computer and select manage, and that opens up that computer management MMC console that we had looked at a few weeks ago. So the device manager is just right there as a snap-in. And the final way to get there is to right-click computer, select properties, and in this menu you can select device manager, and that will bring device manager up. So we're going to go ahead and just leave it up here. So essentially what device manager is it's exactly like it sounds. It's a way for you to manage all of the devices on your computer. You can see here that you have the local machine, and in this case it's TimVM laptop. And then you have all of the categories of all the different devices that you've got plugged into your machine. So for example, I have disk drives, and you can see here that I've got 2 of them, and this is running in a VMware virtual machine, so you can see that it's VMware Virtual Disk. For those of you that are running in the VirtualBox environment, you might see something similar, but it'll say VirtualBox instead of VMware. You can see here I've got a few devices in here that are related to display drivers. CD-ROM drives, and so on and so forth. But really, again, what you can do here is you'll be able to manage all of your devices. So basically what I'm going to do here is we're just going to go over kind of generally how to use this. So the first thing here, you can see you've got the file and options menu. You can select exit to exit the MMC here, or the snap-in here. You can also click options, and then that will give you some disk cleanup options. Go ahead and click OK. Action here. Say you plugged in a new device and it's not being automatically detected. You can click scan for hardware changes, and then that will go through and it will rescan your machine for hardware changes. You can also select properties here to select the property of the device of the device that you're trying to look at. It's the same effect as going right-click and selecting properties. You select view here, you can sort how the devices are being shown. In the default view, it shows it by category. You can also set it to view devices by connection. You can view devices by, and connection is just how it's connected to the machine logically. This view is a little bit more complex though. In general, I like to keep it on device type. It's just nice and neat and easy to view. But you also have the option of doing resources by type and resources by connection. But we're just going to select resources by type. You could also notice here if you have this customize menu, it's got that same MMC snap-in controls or view controls that we looked at in a previous module. So you can use that to manage how this looks. We're going to leave it as default. I really like how the default looks in this, so I don't tend to play around with it too much. And then finally, you've got some help topics. So that's the menu. Let's say you want to manage a device though. I have this LaCie USB drive. This is just a big 2 terabyte hard drive that I've got plugged into this virtual machine. But let's say I want to manage some of this. So let's say we decide, okay, well the driver itself, and we'll just segue right into how to update drivers. The driver itself, and we talked about drivers a few weeks ago, but the driver isn't quite up to date, and we want to try to select the latest update from Microsoft. All you have to do is right-click and select Update Driver Software. And you can say search automatically here, and this will check Microsoft servers for an update to that driver. But if you have a specific driver that you're trying to install, you can click Browse my computer for driver software. So if we click that, we can choose where we want to look for the driver. And I don't have one available for myself right now to show you, but you know, if I had a specific custom driver that I got from the manufacturer that didn't have an executable installer, I could go through this route to install it. And then the great thing about this is it will search your computer. If you just leave it as C, it will search your entire computer, including this, if you have this include subfolders option checked for that particular driver. Then we're going to hit next. And you can see here that it's searching C, there the C drive, and every folder underneath. Now that's going to take a while, so we're just going to hit cancel. But if it did detect something, it would say driver found, or do you want to install this driver? So we'll hit cancel. So that's basically how to update the driver software manually. Typically when you plug in a device, it gets updated automatically through Windows Update, but sometimes you have to force it to update. And we talked about updates a few weeks ago. If you have your machine set to not update, then this is how you would manually install a driver. So your other options here, you have disable. So if you want to leave the device drivers installed, but you want to disable the device, let's say you have like a webcam that's turned on and you want to physically turn it off, you could just right click and select disable. And it warns you here that disabling this device would cause the device to stop functioning. We're going to say yes. And then it's going to do its thing here. And just as a proof of concept here, we'll look into the computer section here. And you can see here that that LaCie drive is no longer available. Now you'll notice here that the icon changed on the left hand side. So if it has a down arrow here next to the icon, that means the device is disabled. And usually when you launch Device Manager, if there's any devices that are disabled, they'll be expanded here. So you'll be able to see which devices are disabled at a glance. Now, if you have a device that's plugged in and Windows can't find the driver for it via Windows Update, what you'll see is something similar to this. And you can see here that there's a yellow exclamation mark next to the icon. Excuse me. And that is showing you that the device driver is not installed for that device. So similar to showing devices disabled, you'll also see things that have no driver installed. So if you want to install a driver, you can do the right click and then update driver software method, and sometimes that will allow you to go out and find it via Windows Update. If you can't find it via Windows Update, then you'll have to download the driver from the manufacturer, and you'll have to go the search my computer route to install the driver. Now that said, oftentimes hardware devices will come with a CD for you to install the device driver. So sometimes you'll be able to find it there. If not, just look at the manufacturer's website. So if you want to re-enable the device, you can just select Enable. And then we'll look in here, I'll do a refresh. And we'll be able to see that this device is now plugged in again. It's at least showing up in the Device Manager. If it doesn't show up here, what we'd have to do is go into the Disk Management utility that we talked about a few weeks ago, and then we'd have to enable the drive. I'm going to let that do its thing here while we're continuing to go along here. So you've got a couple other options here. If you want to completely uninstall the device, you can just right click and select uninstall, and that will completely remove both the driver and the hardware device from your machine. So you'd have to completely go through and reinstall the device if you wanted to use it again. This is particularly useful if you have if you're switching like graphics cards out. You may want to completely uninstall the previous graphics card, driver, and card before putting the new one in. But you don't have to do that as often now. You used to have to do that a lot in Windows XP, but not so much now. Let's see, what else can we show you? If we right click and the device driver here, the device, and select Properties, you'll see here that we have some information about that drive. Now you'll notice that this is really similar to that hard drive menu that we had looked at earlier in the hard drive lab / module. That's because it's exactly the same menu. So you can see here it gives you some general information, gives you policies, for quick removal or better. We already looked through most of these. It shows you the volume and how it's all set up, and then it shows you some information about the driver. Now, as far as this week's concerned, the driver tab and the general tab, those are the two most important tabs that we can look at in, in a device's properties. The general tab shows us some general information about that drive. For example, it will show you typically the device manufacturer along with the location that it's installed. So for example, if in this example, the USB drive is installed via USB, so you can see here that it says USB mass storage device. Perhaps the most important thing in this menu is the device status. So the device status will actually tell you, well, the status of the device. So if it's working properly, it'll say the device is working properly. If there's no driver installed, it'll tell you, hey, there's no driver installed. And there's a few other error messages that you'll run into. Oftentimes here what you'll get is an error code. And then you can take that error code because it's unique. And then you can go to Google and you can Google for what that error code is. It's usually helpful, sometimes it's not, but that's your good first starting point. So that's the general tab. Now I mentioned the driver tab before, and this should be pretty familiar to you after going through that the last lab, or the last two labs, excuse me. But two really important features, or three really important features here. You can see here we've got the disable and the uninstall and the update driver options that we had in that right-click menu. You've also got the driver details tab, which will tell you some information about the driver. And now this works again for all of these devices. So if you need to find out some information about your keyboard as far as the device driver goes, you can go through the same process to find the driver. You already found the driver details in lab 2, I believe. So this is exactly where you would have gone. Now, the other option here, and I can't quite show you this, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to post a link to a video demo of this in the discussion, or excuse me, underneath the video link here. But this option allows you to roll back a driver. So by roll back, what that means is if you've updated the driver and then for whatever reason the driver doesn't work, causes your computer to blue screen, you know, the device actually functions more poorly afterwards, then you can roll back the driver without having to completely reinstall everything. And to do that, you just click this roll back driver icon, and then basically you'll just go through a wizard and it will roll back the driver to the previous version. So it's just one thing to save you a little bit of a hassle from having to uninstall everything and then reinstall it. So that's basically the device manager. I highly encourage you to go through the device manager and just play around with what you can find. You know, I mentioned like if you want to look at the keyboard and see the driver information for the keyboard, it's the same thing. You'll notice we have a few less tabs up here, but you still have got general and you've got driver. And you can look at the driver details and you can see the actual driver files that the keyboard is using. But like I was saying, I highly encourage you to go through the device manager and look at all of the information and play around with it and see what you can come up with. So we're going to go ahead and close the device manager and we're going to go talk about device stage. So device stage in Windows 7, whoops, excuse me, I did not want to launch that. Device stage in Windows 7 simply refers to devices and printers. So the reason it has kind of a special name in Windows 7 is because of how it displays the icons. It differs in Windows 7 than it did in previous versions of Windows. You'll notice here that the icons, while these are all printers, some of them have different icons. And the really cool thing is when you install a printer, the driver sometimes includes a picture file of the actual device you're using. So if you've got a particular mouse or a particular keyboard or a particular printer, it will actually try to map the icon to look like that device you plugged in. So in this case, I've set these printers up. These are just fake printers, and you're going to go through setting those up in your lab. But they are using the HP 910 driver, and that looks exactly like an HP 910. So it just makes it easier for the end user to distinguish what device they're trying to connect to. So the two main kind of advanced topics that I wanted to talk about are printer pools and printer priority. So first, let's talk about printer pools. So the printer pools are they're actually really useful in an environment where you have a lot of people printing. Specifically, what you can do with printer pools is you can take two or more printers, and you can set them up as one virtual printer or one logical printer. And then you can deploy that one logical printer out to all of your users, and then when they print to those printers, it will choose between the available physical printers that you have set up where it wants to print. So let's say, for example, you've got 3 printers. We'll say printer 1, printer 2, and printer 3. And you find that your users have been using one printer. You've mapped all 3 printers to all your users, and you find that your users are using printer 1 more than they're using printer 2 or printer 3. And so that's causing a lot of wear and tear on the printer. What you can do is you can set up a pool. So it basically takes all 3 of these printers and it will combine them into one virtual printer. So what they'll see is something like, and the name you name it is arbitrary, but for the purposes of this example, I'm just going to call it virtual printer 1. Virt print 1. You can set them up in a pool. So now in a pool, what you're doing is you're letting Windows decide which one of these printers you want to send, which one of these printers it wants to send the job to. So basically, like if you've got let's say an accounting department and they're printing off a whole bunch of checks, or not checks, that's a bad example. Let's say you've got a graphics department and they're printing off a whole bunch of graphics. Well, that's going to tie up one of these printers. So if someone else comes around and they say, okay, well, I want to print a print job, what it's going to do is it's going to detect that, hey, we're releasing a job here at printer 1, so let's release that next job at printer 2 or printer 3. So basically what that does is it allows you to print 3 jobs simultaneously, and then a user doesn't have to wait at a specific printer for their job to print. Now, one of the downsides, or not downsides, but one of the things you got to keep in mind when you set up a virtual printer like this is you have to realize that these machines have to be all kind of in the same place, because again, you're letting Windows decide where you want to, or where it wants to send this print job. And if it decides to send a print job to printer 1 and that's located in another building from the printer 2 and printer 3, then the user is going to wonder where their print job went. The other reason they need to be located together is because the way that you set up these printers, or this virtual printer, requires you to use the same device driver. So not only do these printers have to be together, but they also have to be the same type of printer. So for example, here in my office, we have 3 Hewlett-Packard or HP printers, and they are all the same, and they're set up in a print pool, just like this. And they all have the same exact device driver, but we let Windows decide where it wants to print. And that basically just, again, makes it so users aren't waiting for their jobs, and it makes printing a little bit more efficient. So if we want to set one of these up, all we have to do is we click Add a Printer, and then we go through the printer add process. And then once we've added our printer, and again, I'm not going to go through this because your book walks you through adding a printer. But once we've got to the point where we've added a printer, let's say that we've added printer 1 to our printer here, or excuse me, we've added our virtual printer. That's what we're doing here by adding this printer. Then what we'll want to do is we'll want to right click, and we'll select Printing Properties. We'll go over to this Ports tab, and then from there, we would have to add a port. So typically this is all done over the network. So what we would do is we'd add a network port using an IP address like you'd see here. So I'm just going to walk you through it. We'll click Add Port, and from this list we'll hit Standard TCP IP port. Select New. It's going to bring up this wizard, and we're going to enter the IP address. So I would just put the IP address. And we're going to talk a little bit about IP addressing, I think next week, so be prepared for that. But for now, for right now, just follow the information that your lab has you go through when you do the lab. So, printer name or IP address, so we're going to put the IP address in here. It's going to assign a port to it. Then we're going to click Next, and it's going to go through and it's going to detect the IP port. Now, if the printer isn't on your network, or if there isn't a device on your network that uses that IP address, then you're going to have a message pop up that basically says that, hey, you can't use that, and then you can click right through it just to continue to add along, or to add that port. But it does try to do some sort of a scan here to make sure that that's actually a valid port in your address range. So I'm going to click cancel here because this may take a little bit of time. When you're doing your lab, make sure you give yourself some time because some of the TCP/IP parts of the lab may take a while like it is now. So I'm going to click cancel. And luckily for me, I thought ahead and I've created a few printer pools. So what these IP ports here, or what these ports are, is they are the actual IP addresses of the physical printers. Not the virtual printer, they're the physical IP addresses of the physical printers. So in our example here, we're going to assign printer 1 10.192.201.11, printer 2 is going to be 10.192.201.6, and printer 3 is going to be 10.192.201.2. So right now we have this one single printer, .11, which would be printer 1, mapped to this virtual printer, HP 910, or it's named HP 910. Again, this name is arbitrary. You'll notice that when you go through the printing setup process. So let's say we want to create, or excuse me, let's say we want to create a print pool, and we're going to take all three of these printers and we're going to combine them to be HP 910. So we're going to click Enable Printer Pooling right down here, and then all we have to do is we have to select these, the three printer ports that we added. We'll hit Apply, and then we'll hit OK. And that's really all there is to it. It's pretty easy. So now when a user prints to the HP 910, it's going to select one of these three printers to release their print job at. So fairly straightforward, I think. Really easy to set up. You just have to, again, keep in mind that they should all be in the same place, and they all need to be the same make or model. So that is a printer pool. Now let's talk about printer priority. So let's say you work in an office and you only have one printer available, and you have a specific department, typically these are the big bosses, that need to print, and they need their jobs to come out before everyone else's does. So what you'd have to do is you have to set up what's called printer priority, and that basically just explains when several jobs are submitted to a printer, which jobs should be prioritized first. So the way that you do that is you have to create two or more virtual printers that point to the same IP, or the same physical printer. So this is kind of like the reverse of what we were just looking at. So we have, let's say we have PRT1, and that's the only printer in our environment, but we want to have managers' jobs come out first. So what we'll have to do is we'll have to create two logical printers. We're going to call one managers, which you can see I've already set up, and then we're going to call the other one employees. And those two printers, or those two virtual printers, are going to point to the same physical printer. So again, virtual printer managers and virtual printer employees both point to the same printer, PRT1. So what I've gone what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to use this as an example. We're gonna just, for the purposes of this, we're gonna undo what we just did, and we're gonna rename this printer, and we're gonna name this employees. So all you have to do to get to this point again is just to add a printer, and then you're gonna add a virtual printer, and then you'll do it again once for managers and once for employees. Now if you want to print to the same printer, all you have to do is right click and select printer properties. Again, you go back over to this ports tab, and then you select the port that you want to print to. So in this case, the IP address of this printer is going to be 10.192.254.70. And that's the physical address of the printer. So that's what we're also going to set the physical or the logical address to. So the managers will point to 10.192.254.70. And the employees printer, excuse me, will also point to 10.192.254.70. So that's the first step. The next step is we have to enable, or we have to set, excuse me, let's uncheck that. The next step here is we have to set the printer priority. So, okay, here we go. So what we have to do is, after we've gone ahead and we've set the IP address of the manager's printer and the employee's printer, or excuse me, rather the port address of the employees and manager's printer to be the same, pointing at PRT1, the physical printer. What we'll have to do is we'll have to go in here and we'll go to this Advanced tab. And then we're going to change the priority here. So this Advanced tab, I'll just go over it really briefly. So there's a few things you can do here. First off, you can change the driver. So if you need to update the driver to a completely different device driver, or if you need to just change it for any reason, you can do so through here. You can click New Driver, and then it will take you through this wizard. You can always set, or you can also set when the printer is available from. So let's say you only want employees to be able to print between 9 and 5. You just select 9, or always available from, and then select 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. And then this print queue will not print, or this anything set to the employee's printer will not print until, or unless it's between the time of 9 and 5. There's also a few other options here. You can choose whether or not you want to how you want to spool the documents. So you can tell it to start printing immediately, or you can tell it to start printing after the last page is spooled. We'll go over spooling, or you're going to go over spooling in your lab, or excuse me, in your module 4 reading, or in your module 4 reading. So make sure you go over that. That's chapter 5. You can also set it up to print directly to the printer. For now, what you're going to do is you're just going to leave it on spooled. But if you want to print directly to the printer without going through the spooling process, you'll just select this option here. So spooling, just as a brief overview, basically it's the process of taking the document, converting it from a digital format to an analog format, and then queuing it up so that it holds all of the jobs in sort of a print queue. If you click print directly to the printer, sometimes there's printers that have a lot of memory in them, and then they handle the process of spooling the document. But in general, it's best to just leave it as Windows, or leave it to Windows to spool the document first. You've also got a couple other options down here. You can print spooled documents first. You can keep printed documents, so you can keep them in your print queue if you want to reprint them. And you've got a few other options here. for example, setting a separator page. You can change the print processor. Generally, I don't like to mess with this. And then you've got some printing defaults, which is exactly the same as right-clicking a printer and selecting printing preferences. But in this menu, what we really care about is the printer priority. So depending on how you set this printer priority, the printer priority determines which printer jobs get sent out first. So the kind of rule of thumb here, excuse me for just 1 second. So the rule of thumb here is you want to make sure that the jobs you want to print first have the higher print priority. So in Windows terms, the lowest priority is 1, the highest priority is 99. So going back to our example here, if we want our manager's printer to print first, we would set the manager's printer to something higher than the employee's printer. So since we're editing the employees properties tab right now, we're going to select 1 because again that is the lowest. And then we'll hit OK. And then going to the manager's printer here, we're going to select printer properties. We'll go to the advanced tab, and then we're going to just select 99. And we'll hit apply. Now, selecting an option of 2 or greater, actually in this case, will have the exact same effect. So that is printer pools and printer priority. If you wanted to map these printers to people, again, this is usually done over a network. So what we've done here is we've kind of created our own little print server. There are better tools on the server end to do that, but if we wanted to map these, if we wanted to map these to another computer, all we'd have to do is go over to that computer. We'd have to type // and then we type the computer name. In this case, since I'm dealing with just my local machine, I'm going to type localhost. And then we'll be able to see all of the, if I was sharing them, we'd be able to see all of the printers that are associated with this particular host. So in this case, I'll show you something else really quick, just because I kind of made a fool of myself here. We're going to right click and we're going to select printer properties again. We'll click sharing, and then if we wanted to share this printer with other people over the network, we just click share, and then you'd select the share name. We're going to keep it simple and keep the share name the exact same as the printer name. Keep in mind that those can be different. We'll select render print jobs on client computers. That basically just determines where the print job is rendered or converted from digital to analog format. We're going to leave that up to rendering on the client computers. Then we're going to click OK. We'll go back over here, we'll select refresh, and now you can see that managers is showing up as a shared printer. And we can do the same with employees here. I'll just show you one more time really quick. Printer properties, sharing, share this printer. We're going to leave it at employees, and we'll click OK. And we'll refresh. And now you can see we've got employees and we've got managers. So in order to map this printer, all you'd have to do on another person's computer is double click this, and then it would download the driver automatically from the print server that we just set up, and we'd be able to excuse me, and we'd be able to just start printing to it right away. If we wanted to really quickly, going back to our example here, just to finish it out. So we set up the employee's virtual queue, and then we set up the manager's virtual queue. So what you would do in this sense, if you wanted managers to print first, since they all print to the same physical printer, PRT1, we would map the manager's print queue to anyone that is considered a manager, and then everyone else would get the employee's printer. Now again, they print to the exact same printer, they have the same drivers, same everything. The only difference in this scenario that we've done is we've set the print priorities so that anything sent to the manager's printer gets printed first. Hope that makes sense. So that kind of closes out printer pools and printer priority. And then we also got to talk a little bit about printer sharing too. There's some information that we're going to learn next week and the week after that involves setting up permissions for each one of these, for network resources. You'll delve a little bit into it this week. Make sure that you keep in mind, or make sure that you understand the difference in terms of the share permissions for these printers. So, for example, where are we? If we go to security here, you can see these are the permissions for everyone. We're going to delve into this a little bit too. If we wanted to change the permissions for administrators, you can see here you've got print, manage this printer, and manage documents. So I'll go over each one of these individually just really fast here. So print, it's exactly like it sounds. It allows this particular user or group to print to this printer. Manage this printer means that if you were to right-click the printer and select properties, properties, you'd be able to change the settings that are in here. Now, you don't necessarily want all your users to be able to do that, especially if you have printers that print in color, and you only want certain users to be able to print in color. You might think twice about giving people the option to print that way. So that's one way you could control that. And then the final permission here that we can set is manage documents. So manage documents, if we were to right click a printer and then click see what's printing, you'd be able to see any documents that were being printed. And you might not necessarily want everyone to be able to right click and cancel a print job or another user's print job, so you might not give them that permission. Typically what I give to my users is I give them only print permissions because I want to control how they are accessing the printer. And then what I'll do is I'll do what we did here, and I'll create virtual print queues for different settings that people might need. So if they need to print in color, then I'd only map the color version of that printer or that virtual printer that I set up to the people that need to print in color. So there's a few, we'll just go back really quick over what we talked about. So we talked a little bit about the device manager, general usability and what we can do with it, how we can use it to update drivers and rollback drivers. We talked a little bit about what the device stage is and how it's different in Windows 7 versus other versions of Windows. And then we talked about printers and how we can set up print pools and printer priority. Again, this week you're going to be going over Chapter 5. So make sure you give that a read. I think it's a really good read, especially because printers are kind of one of the more fickle things you'll deal with when you're managing Windows environments, and any other environment for that matter. So it's worth learning how both a printer works and how we can set it up over the network. If you've got any questions, as always, you can post in the discussion boards or you can email me directly. Thanks so much and have a fantastic week.